My very first favorite step in gardening is creating my garden plan. So every year, I create a garden plan in the middle of winter. That's the first thing I do before I plant anything in the ground. And I have found that this really helps me have the most productive season. In the past, I used to just go outside and just plant whatever, wherever. And what I found was I usually wound up with a lot of wasted space. I wound up with a lot of areas in the garden that weren't growing anything, that weren't productive. And I spend money and I spend time cultivating the soil of my garden and, trying to produce something from my garden. So having a lot of wasted space, it is really disappointing and disheartening. Because of this, I've come up with a strategy to create a plan every single year. I know what I'm planting, I know where I'm planting it. I take notes throughout the growing season that tell me what grew well, what issues I ran into, how I managed pests, and I keep a record of all of these things. By creating this plan and keeping notes throughout the growing season, every year I become a better gardener. So today I want to walk you through my garden planning process and the strategy I use. There are a lot of different ways you could plan your garden. You could get out a piece of paper and just write it down. There's a lot of software that will help you plan your garden. You could use a Word document. I like to use an Excel spreadsheet. That's just my preference, but you could do it a myriad of different ways. Don't get hung up too much on the how, because like I said, even if it's just a piece of paper for you where you sketch out your garden and write in what you're planting, that's going to be good. A lot of people will keep a journal throughout the growing season. They'll sketch out their garden in their journal and then take notes of the varieties they plant and what went well or went wrong with those varieties, their successes and their failures throughout the growing season. So like I said, don't get hung up on the how. There's a myriad of different ways to plan your garden. Today, I'm just going to show you my method, which is, like I said, the Excel spreadsheet. The first step in my garden planning process is choosing the right varieties. So I live in Florida and I deal with a lot of pest and disease issues, a lot of humidity. It gets really, really hot during the summer here. And so I deal with a lot of challenges that maybe the rest of the United States doesn't deal with. Because of that, I have to be careful about what varieties I choose. There's a lot of things that just won't grow very well here. For instance, I can grow something like an Everglade tomato. Everglade tomatoes thrive in Florida, but beefsteak tomatoes, most of your beefsteak varieties aren't going to do as well here. Because I know that, I can plan what varieties I'm going to plant based on my climate, my location, based on my USDA hardiness zone, my frost dates, which I've talked about before. But knowing all that information, the very first thing I do is pick my varieties and order my seeds. After I've picked my varieties, ordered my seeds, and they've come in, from that point, I take my Excel spreadsheet and I plan exactly how I'm going to plant out my garden. Each cell in the spreadsheet represents 1 square foot of garden space. So because of this, I can plan out exactly how much of a variety will go in each bed. The very first thing I start with is the garden layout. So I have a worksheet that shows all 5 of my raised beds that I've built. The gray represents the trellises. I have a worksheet created for each individual bed. And then from here, I put in the varieties that are going to go, like I said, in each bed and how many of that variety I'm putting in. So like on bed 1 here, I have my watermelons, my tiger melons, and because I know that those are vining crops, they grow very low to the ground. They do take up a lot of space, but they take up a lot of space horizontally. Because I know this, I can figure out what is a good companion plant for my melons. And okra is actually a really good companion plant for melons. One, they both thrive in the heat. They both need a lot of water. And okra takes up a lot of vertical space. It grows tall. So by having the melons growing low to the ground and the okra growing vertically, I can actually get more production in this bed because I'm using my space efficiently and I'm using my space wisely. Bed 2 here is a little bit smaller. It's most of my beds are 8 feet long and 4 feet wide. Bed 2 here is 2 feet wide, 2 feet wide, and 10 feet long. Bed 3 is going to have a trellis in the back here. That's represented by these gray squares. I'm planting zucchinis and summer squash here in this front part of the bed. And what I actually did here was I left a square foot of space in between the zucchini and the cucumbers that I'm planting on the trellis to allow for room for airflow. Now, a lot of people will tell you do not plant your cucumbers and your summer squash together. This may be especially true in my area in Florida. Both of these things are going to deal with a lot of pest issues, but I'm not expecting massive harvests off of either of these. This is more of an experiment. I'm trying to see if I can get anything. I love zucchini, I love summer squash, I love cucumbers, but those are not going to grow super well in my area. What will grow a little bit better is going to be my loofahs and my yard-long beans. So I have some of that space represented here, but also I'm going to try to grow cucumbers because I love them. I'm going to try to grow my summer squash because I love them, and we'll see how it goes. That brings me to bed 4. Bed 4 also has a trellis on the back, and on bed 4 I'm going to be growing some of my tomato variety. San Marzano might do okay here. A red centerfloor cherry tomato is another very productive tomato. So these are things I grew successfully in North Carolina. This is going to be my first year growing in Florida. So I'm going to try it. I'm going to try some of the tips I've heard from other people. An important note here is I'm actually growing these a little bit later in the season than I probably should be. I should have planted these a few months ago already. So again, not something that I'm expecting to have high production on this very first year. I'm more looking at how I can learn to grow them in the area that I'm in. And then in the front here, I'm going to be planting my peppers. I have my sweet bell peppers, my cubanelle peppers, and my shishito peppers. And we'll see how those do here in this Florida climate. Bed number 5 is going to be more tomatoes. So I have my Everglade tomatoes represented here and my Homestead tomato. Both of these are varieties that are supposed to do well in my climate. I'm not sure how well they're going to do come July and August, but hopefully I can get them going and I can get a harvest off of them before it gets too hot and before they succumb to either bugs or humidity. I also have gold nugget tomatoes. This is a determinate variety that I can use like a small tomato cage, and they'll do just fine with just that small little bit of support because they're only going to get to a determined height. That's what determined means. They get to a determined height. They're going to set all of their fruit at once. They're going to have a huge flush of little small gold tomatoes, and then that plant will begin to die out. Lemon basil, I love lemon basil. Basil goes really well with tomatoes, so I have that represented here. And then I'm growing my marigolds, specifically the French dwarf variety. And the reason that I'm putting marigolds here is that's a very good companion plant for tomatoes. At least there's anecdotal evidence that it does help kind of prevent the tomato hornworm from coming near your tomato plants. I have found that the years where I planted marigolds near my tomato plants did much better. So I don't know if this is scientifically proven, but it's just been my experience that marigolds and tomatoes do well together. So that's what I'm planting. Throughout the growing season, what I'm also going to do is create spaces where I make notes for each of the varieties I grow in each bed. I'll make notes of how I mulch each bed. I'll make notes of the amendments that I put in. This way I can see which beds perform better. I'll even make notes on things like how much light it receives throughout the growing season. Right now it looks like bed 1 is probably going to be a little bit more shady, which could be a problem with my okra and my watermelons, but I'm hoping it all works out. We're going to see. So throughout the growing season, I'll see how well these do here. This may be a bed that's better suited for lettuces or spinaches or some of my brassicas. So I'll keep notes throughout the growing season, and this will help me as I go into next year to be able to use my space even more efficiently. The other thing I'll notate here is how I deal with pests. So this may be something where you can experiment, right? Like in one bed, you have this pest management system in place. Maybe in another bed, you try another pest management system. The same can be true with mulch. Maybe I'm trying one type of mulch in bed 1 and a different type of mulch in, say, bed 3. All of these things would be things I would keep note of throughout the growing season. And as I go into next season, this is just going to make me a better gardener and tell me what works better in my, not only my climate, like my region, but also in my microclimate. So every backyard is going to have a slightly different microclimate. There are going to be different things that affect you that maybe don't affect your neighbors. So even though somebody's growing close by to you, you may have a different experience than they do. Keeping notes for your particular situation is going to be incredibly valuable. Another important aspect of our garden planning is being able to keep the space productive. So you may grow one type of crop in a space in spring, but during the main season, you may grow a different type of crop. During the fall season, you may grow a different type of crop. So during the spring, you may start with a lettuce in a square foot of space, and then you harvest that lettuce and you plant maybe a tomato for your main season garden in that space. As the season winds down, it begins to get colder. Maybe you throw spinach in that square foot of space. So you may be able to get several different plants in that 1 square foot of space just by planning accordingly. So what I'll actually do is, as the growing season progresses, I will have a plan for what is going to go into my space next. You pair that by starting your seeds in trays and cups, and you're able to take a plant and plant it directly in that square foot of space as you harvest the first crop out of it. So by doing this, you keep a very productive space. If you want to have a productive growing season, it's important to have a plan. Now, again, back to, it doesn't matter how you put this plan together, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet, whether it's a piece of paper, whether there's all kinds of software that you can use. The how doesn't necessarily matter. But the important thing is to plan your space, being mindful of spacing requirements and the growing needs of your seeds, and keep that space productive so that you're always putting something in as you're harvesting. I hope this video was helpful. I hope you got some value out of it. And if you did, please leave us a like and a comment, and check out the video on your screen to watch until my next video comes out. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Thanks.